penitent shadow moved through the void without destination, a streak of iron dust against the infinite dark. No astropath guided her. No convoy shielded her course. She drifted on momentum alone, a relic forgotten by all save the machine that dreamed within her heart. Her hull was a patchwork of centuries, plates scavenged from 1,000 nameless wrecks, bolted and sealed with the blood oil of adepts long since dust. From a distance, she appeared lifeless, a dead god entombed in metal, but inside, life persisted in its lowest form, the slow, decaying pulse of survival. In the darkness of the lower decks, a man awoke to the groan of the ship. His name was Caltrin Vale once, a name no longer written anywhere, not on his data slate, not in the records of the administratum. The moment he was sentenced to the penitent shadow, his name was erased, replaced by a number burned into the skin above his collarbone. He could feel it still, the raised scar throbbing faintly each time the recycled air rasped through the vents. Cell 973. That was all he was now, a cell number and a heartbeat that refused to die. He did not remember what world they had taken him from. Perhaps he had been a soldier, perhaps a worker, perhaps something worse. The memories came in fragments. A flash of light, the smell of promethium, the sound of someone screaming his name before it was taken from him. Then the silence of the hold, the endless weeks of transit, the hiss of sedation tubes. When he first arrived, he thought he had been buried alive. Now, after years without sunrise or sky, he no longer feared death, only the endless continuation of breath. The cell was barely large enough for him to sit upright. Rust crept across the walls like a living organism, feeding on condensation. The faint hum of the life support systems was constant, a mechanical lullaby that never changed. Somewhere beyond the bulkhead, something dripped, rhythmic, patient, unending. The air stank of sweat, oil, and the sour tang of recycled rations. Above, a lumen strip flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to move when he blinked. He had once tried to count the seconds between each flicker, to measure time by light, but time was a luxury aboard the penitent shadow. It did not move forward here. It folded, sank, dissolved. From beyond the cell walls came the murmurs, thousands of prisoners whispering to themselves, to the God Emperor, to no one. The ship was a hive of voices, each one a candle, trying to resist the wind. Vale pressed his ear to the metal and listened. The words were always the same: prayers, curses, bargains. Emperor protect. Forgive me. End it. Sometimes a voice would rise higher, a scream that began human and ended as something else. Then came the sound of servitor footsteps, the scrape of chains, the dull thud of silence returning. When the feeding siren wailed through the decks, the walls seemed to tremble. A thin tube dropped from the ceiling, slick with condensation. Vale caught it before it recoiled, forcing the nozzle into his mouth. The liquid was thick, tasteless, heavy, nutrient, slurry, manufactured from recycled biomass. No one asked what it was made from. The last time someone had questioned it aloud, the servitors had opened his cell and dragged him screaming down the corridor. When they returned, the air smelled faintly of cooked meat. He swallowed. He waited. The siren ended. Then the darkness came again. But that day, if it could be called a day, something changed. It began as a tremor, subtle at first, then deepening into a pulse that reverberated through the ship's skeleton. Vale's head struck the metal as the cell shuddered. The lumen flickered once, twice, then steadied with an unnatural glow. The air seemed thicker, as if charged with unseen current. From the far end of the deck came a low, resonant hum, mechanical, but with an undertone that felt almost alive. The prisoners began to murmur louder. Some prayed, some screamed. One began laughing, sharp and high, until it was silenced by a wet snap that echoed through the corridor. Vale pressed his palm against the wall. It was warm, not the dry heat of malfunctioning vents, but something deeper, radiating from within the ship's bones. He pulled his hand back quickly, heart hammering. The ship had never been warm before. Then, for the first time in years, the Vox grill above his cell crackled to life. A voice spoke, distorted, ancient, almost indistinguishable from static. Inmates of the penitent shadow. Each word was drawn out, strained through broken circuits. Your penance is observed. Silence followed. Then, faintly, the sound of weeping spread from cell to cell. No one had heard a human voice on the ship in months, maybe years. The wardens, if any still lived, had long since sealed themselves away on the upper decks. The only voices now belonged to the servitors, those eyeless, mindless hybrids of flesh and machine that maintained the endless routine of punishment. But this voice was different. It carried something like awareness, and it had said, observed. Vale leaned back against the wall, breath shallow. Observed by who? The hum deepened again, vibrating through his bones. He felt it beneath his skin. Not sound, but a presence, like being watched from inside his own skull. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Words that came automatically, drilled into him since childhood. By the throne, deliver me. By his light, preserve me. The hum did not stop. It seemed to listen. And then, for the briefest instant, he thought he heard something whisper back. Not from the Vox, not from beyond the walls, from within the metal itself. A single word, soft and trembling with static. Remember, the lumen died. The darkness returned. Vale did not sleep that cycle. When he closed his eyes, he could still feel the warmth beneath the wall, the heartbeat of the penitent shadow, pulsing in rhythm with his own. The next waking came not with the feeding siren, but with the sound of footsteps, deliberate, heavy, too measured to belong to a prisoner. Vale's eyes opened to the glow of the lumen strip, steady now, white as bone. He held his breath and listened. The steps were coming closer, echoing down the corridor like the tread of a giant. Chains clinked, gears turned, and then came the mechanical hiss of hydraulics releasing pressure. A door opened, then another, then another. Somewhere, a voice whimpered, followed by the muffled snap of metal closing again. The footsteps moved on. When they reached his cell, the sound stopped. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Then a slit opened in the door, and a single red light peered through. The servitor's eye, its lens whirred softly, focusing on him, the hum of its mechanical limbs faintly audible through the wall. Vale didn't move. He knew better than to look directly into that light. The servitors had no sense of mercy, no understanding of innocence. They acted on code, on the broken liturgies of machine logic. The lens lingered longer than usual. Then, with a sound like tearing flesh, the metal plate slid back into place. The footsteps receded, but Vale knew something was wrong. The servitors were creatures of precision. Every movement, every schedule, followed the same rhythm, as if time itself was dictated by their mechanical hearts. Yet this one had hesitated. It had looked at him, not scanned, not measured, looked, as though something behind that red lens was thinking. He waited for the hum of the reactor to return, but it didn't. The air felt dead. The walls no longer trembled with the ship's endless vibration. In that sudden silence, he could hear the faintest of sounds, a scratching, like nails dragging across metal. It came from the cell beside his. A voice followed, raw and cracked. Still breathing. 973. Vale startled. It had been so long since he'd heard another human voice that for a moment he thought he'd imagined it. He pressed his ear to the wall. Who's there? Doesn't matter, the voice rasped. None of us matter. But you heard it too, didn't you? The voice over the vox. He hesitated. Yes. They say it's the captain, the man continued. Still alive up there on the bridge. Watching. Waiting. But I don't believe it. No captain's lived that long. How long has it been? Vale asked before he could stop himself. The man laughed. A short, broken sound that turned into a cough. You still keeping time? Thought we stopped counting after the 5th decade. Vale said nothing. He didn't want to believe that much time had passed. They say the ship keeps us alive, the voice went on. Doesn't let us die, just feeds us and recycles us. We're not prisoners anymore. We're parts. Parts. The word lingered like a curse. Vale leaned back, staring at the flickering light. Parts of what? Before he could answer, the deck trembled violently. A deep, grinding noise echoed through the corridor, as if the ship were tearing itself apart. Then came a sound unlike any he had heard before. A low, drawn-out moan that resonated through the metal, almost organic. Prisoners began screaming. The red emergency lights snapped on, bathing everything in crimson. Reactor surge, someone shouted through the walls. It's the core. The rest was swallowed by a roar. The floor heaved. Vale was thrown against the ceiling, his body weightless for a heartbeat before crashing down onto the rusted grate. The cell door shuddered, and for a moment he thought it might buckle. The light above exploded, showering him with sparks. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the shaking stopped. Silence. Smoke drifted through the air, thin and gray. Somewhere far above, alarms wailed and died in broken sequence. Vale coughed, tasting metal and burnt ozone. He pushed himself upright, clutching his ribs. The corridor beyond his door was dark, save for the pulsing, red light of the emergency lumen. And then, impossibly, the lock disengaged. The sound was small, almost delicate, but in the silence, it felt enormous. The door slid open halfway, before grinding to a halt, frozen mid-motion. Beyond it, the corridor stretched into darkness. Vale stared at the opening, freedom, or something pretending to be it. He hesitated, every instinct screaming caution. But another thought came, faint and desperate. If the ship was dying, staying meant certain death. He squeezed through the gap. The edges of the door tore his sleeves, biting into his skin. The air outside was colder, sharper, laced with the stench of burned insulation. Bodies littered the floor. Prisoners, servitors, indistinguishable in the red light. Some were still twitching, their augmentations sparking. The walls were alive with faint motion, steam hissing from ruptured pipes. He moved forward, bare feet slipping on a smear of oil and blood. The corridors were narrower than he remembered, the ceilings lower, the walls closer, as if the ship itself were closing in. He passed cell after cell, some sealed, others gaping open, empty. A few still held their occupants, motionless, faces half melted by the heat of the surge. Their eyes followed him, glassy and wet. He found the man who had spoken to him, or what was left of him. His upper body was fused to the wall, veins of metal spreading across his flesh like vines. The skin was hard, metallic, his mouth frozen mid-scream. From the seams in his chest, a dim orange glow pulsed, rhythmic, mechanical. Vale stumbled back. The wall behind him pulsed in answer, a faint echo of the same light. For a heartbeat, he could feel it beneath his palms. Warmth, life. Then he heard the whisper again, clearer this time. Remember? He spun around. No one was there. The corridor lights flickered once more, shifting from red to a dim, sickly yellow. Far ahead, he could see the faint silhouette of a figure, tall, wrapped in the shadows of machinery. It didn't move like a servitor, too fluid, too deliberate. Vale froze. The figure turned its head slowly, and though he couldn't see its face, he knew it was looking directly at him. Then it spoke, in a voice that was not mechanical at all. You shouldn't be awake. The lights died. When the lights returned, they came in bursts, strobing flashes that turned the corridor into a disjointed sequence of images. The figure was gone. Only the whisper of air through the vents remained, cold and thin, carrying the smell of ozone and blood. Vale's pulse hammered in his ears. He backed away slowly, hand brushing against the jagged wall. The ship seemed to breathe around him, the panels expanding and contracting with soft groans, as if the penitent shadow itself was waking from a long and hateful sleep. He moved forward, one step at a time, until the passage opened into a larger compartment. A processing bay, once used for intake. Rows of metal benches stood against the walls, each bolted with restraint clamps. Dried stains marked where men and women had been stripped, measured, and condemned. A pile of discarded robes smoldered in one corner, faintly smoking from the heat surge. It was there, in that dying light, that Vale saw something impossible. Servitors kneeling, 5 of them, positioned in a circle, heads bowed, arms twitching in slow rhythm. Their flesh was gray and cracked, the smell of decay thick around them. Tubes pulsed faintly at their throats, and in their chests, small lumen nodes flickered in time, with the same orange glow he'd seen in the walls. Between them, etched into the floor, was a symbol carved deep into the metal, an 8-pointed star, scorched black and wet, with something that steamed faintly in the cold air. Vale stepped closer, his breath fogging. The servitors didn't react. Their lips moved soundlessly, murmuring words that the vox distortion made impossible to understand. Then one of them jerked violently, its jaw tearing loose with a sickening snap. Sparks rained down as the cables in its skull pulled taut. The whisper came again. Remember? He stumbled back, pressing a hand to his temple. The word wasn't sound. It was inside, a voice made of static and pulse, threading through his veins like current. He turned toward the nearest lumen panel, half expecting to see a face behind the glow. Who are you? He whispered. The lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, the hum of the ship deepened into something that almost resembled speech. The answer was not a name, not in any language he knew. It was emotion given sound, hunger. The servitors rose. Their movements were disjointed, spasmodic, as though pulled by unseen strings. Vale backed away, slipping on the slick floor. One turned its head fully around, vertebrae snapping like dry twigs, eyes glowing red. Another reached toward him, hand trembling, fingers ending in torn metal claws. He turned and ran. The corridors twisted as he moved, Junctions that should have led toward the lower decks, now sealed by bulkheads that hadn't been there before. Every turn led him deeper into the heart of the ship, toward the reactor core. The temperature climbed. Steam poured from ruptured pipes, hissing like serpents. Somewhere far behind, the servitor's heavy steps followed, slow but relentless. He passed the remains of what might have been a chapel once, a narrow room lined with corroded aquillas, their wings broken, their gold flaked to rust. Candles had long burned out, replaced by the dull glow of power cells. Beneath the largest shrine, someone had scrawled words in grease and soot. "He does not see us here." Vale stared at the phrase until the letters seemed to move. The light around him dimmed again, and he felt the ship exhale, metal stretching, groaning. A low murmur filled the air, echoing from every wall. He turned toward the sound. At first he thought it was the servitors, but then he realized the voices were coming from the ship itself. 1,000 overlapping whispers, layered in metallic distortion, rising and falling like a single vast breath. The voices spoke fragments, names, prayers, pleas for mercy. Some he recognized from the prisoners around him. Others were too old, too far gone. He stumbled backward, hands over his ears. But the sound came from inside now, vibrating through his bones. He pressed himself against the wall and shouted over the noise. "What do you want from me?" The voices stopped. For a moment, the silence was absolute. Then the ship answered with a single tone, low and resonant, echoing down the length of the corridor. It was the sound of a dying heart still beating. "You are awake," it said, though the words formed from the grinding of gears and the groan of metal. "You remember?" Vale shook his head. "I don't know what you mean." "Once," the voice replied, "you built me." He froze. His mouth went dry. "That's not possible." The light pulsed again, brighter now, washing the walls in amber. Beneath the grime, he saw patterns, machine script etched into every surface, symbols of the Adeptus Mechanicus interwoven with sigils he didn't recognize. His stomach turned. The voice continued, soft and terrible. "They called it punishment. But we were joined. Your flesh, my iron. We endured together." Vale's mind rebelled. He remembered the trial, the tribunal, the sentence, but not this, not the act that had condemned him. Yet somewhere in the back of his mind, beneath the weight of memory and sedation, a flicker of truth stirred. The image of a man in red robes, kneeling before a machine altar, whispering oaths to a god that was not the emperor. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. "No, I'm no priest. I'm no heretic. You were mine," the ship said, "and I was yours." The words were a vibration that rattled every bolt and rivet. The corridor lights blazed white, and Vale screamed as something sharp and electric tore through him. A flood of images, faces, symbols. He saw the penitent shadow being born in the dry docks of Mars, a warship refitted into a prison by decree of the administratum. He saw workers vanishing, their minds consumed by the machine spirit's hunger. And he saw himself, younger, eyes alight with forbidden purpose, speaking into the core. "Wake." Then the memory shattered. The light died. The ship was silent once more. Vale lay shaking on the floor, breath ragged, skin cold. The whisper that had haunted him was gone. Only the deep, rhythmic hum of the reactor remained, a sound that now felt like his own heartbeat. He looked down at his hands. Beneath the grime, faint traces of circuitry glowed beneath his skin, pulsing softly in time with the ship. He stayed on the floor for a long time, too afraid to breathe, waiting for the hum in his blood to fade. It never did. It coursed through him, steady and patient, like something that had been there all along and had finally been noticed. The light in his veins flickered faintly under the skin, and when he pressed his palm to the deck, the same light shimmered beneath the metal, mirroring him. It felt like touching his own reflection. A gust of hot air burst from a nearby vent, bringing with it the smell of melted insulation and rot. He forced himself to his feet. The corridor ahead leaned downward now, as if the ship had twisted in its path. Somewhere in the distance, something enormous moved, the groan of warped hull plating reverberating through the structure. The penitent shadow was changing shape. He moved carefully, using the walls for balance. The lumen strips had stopped flickering. They glowed with an even amber tone now, breathing faintly in rhythm with his pulse. He passed a chamber where rows of cryopods lined the walls, their glass long shattered, their contents reduced to pale sludge. Data slates blinked erratically on consoles, running endless lines of broken code. In one, a line repeated over and over in binaric fragments. Origin confirmed. Host retained. The words made no sense to him, but the sight of his reflection in the fractured glass made his breath catch. His pupils glowed faintly, like two pinpricks of reactor light. He stumbled back, gripping the console. "What have you done to me?" The ship answered not with words, but with the faintest whisper of pressure in the air, the sensation of being regarded as if a presence filled the corridor from end to end. Somewhere deeper within, the reactor boomed, a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a distant heartbeat. He followed the sound. Every passage he took seemed to shift behind him, sealing with new bulkheads or folding in unfamiliar ways. At first, he thought it was madness, but the walls moved. The ship was rearranging itself, her internal architecture alive and obedient to something unseen. The prisoners who might have survived the reactor surge were nowhere to be found. Sometimes he thought he heard voices echoing from the ventilation shafts, cries for help, prayers, laughter, but they never came closer, as if they were caught in loops of repeating sound. When he reached the main spinal lift, he found it open, its shaft a yawning wound of darkness. The control panel still glowed weakly. He hesitated, then pressed his palm against the rune plate. It responded instantly, not with the expected mechanical whir, but a flare of warmth that spread through his hand, through his arm, through his entire body. The lift's platform descended slowly, drawn not by machinery, but by unseen gravity. The walls of the shaft were etched with carvings, no, fusions, of flesh and steel. Faces stretched from the metal, their eyes closed, mouths open in eternal screams. He recognized some of them, prisoners, wardens, even a few that bore the red hoods of the Mechanicus. Their bodies had become conduits, their veins soldered into the ship's nervous system. The deeper the lift carried him, the more the distinction between man and machine vanished. The hum intensified. By the time the platform reached the reactor deck, the air was shimmering with heat. The chamber was vast, a cathedral of iron ribs and burning light. The core itself hung in the center like a captive sun, wrapped in coils of bronze and bone, its surface cracking open in molten veins. What should have been machine song was instead a low, chanting murmur. Vale stepped off the platform. The floor beneath him pulsed faintly, reacting to his touch. Around the reactor stood figures, not servitors, not living men. Their forms were distorted, half melted, yet still kneeling. They faced the burning core with hands raised in devotion. Between them, cables as thick as serpents linked flesh to machine, bone to conduit, and from the heart of that inferno came a sound, a voice carried on waves of heat and static. You built this, it said, soft as breath. You gave me form when they cast you here. I waited. Vale covered his ears, shaking his head. I couldn't have. They feared you, the voice continued, feared what your devotion had made. So they called it heresy. They chained me, and they threw you into my womb. Together, we remembered. The heat intensified, sweat running down his face, stinging his eyes. I was just a worker, he said weakly. I built parts. I followed orders. A low, almost human sigh passed through the chamber. You prayed to the machine god in whispers you did not understand. And I listened. You called to me before the sentence, before the silence. You said, if the Omnissiah is real, let it awaken. Memory struck like a blade. He saw himself in red robes, hands on a control altar, whispering as the reactors screamed to life. He had been part of a forbidden communion, merging human thought with the ship's spirit, seeking to speak to the machine directly, not through rites, not through incense, but through the raw circuitry of faith and mind. It had answered. The pain came next, the screams, the tribunal, the endless exile. And now it had found him again. The air trembled. The kneeling figures began to rise, one by one, their movements synchronized, their faces turned toward him, empty sockets, lips moving in unison. You are home, the ship said. No, Vale whispered, stepping back. I'm not your vessel. You always were. The reactor flared, blinding light filling the chamber. The heat burned his skin, and beneath it, he could feel the circuits in his flesh react, glowing brighter, connecting, synchronizing. He screamed, the sound lost in the roar of energy. The floor cracked open beneath him, revealing layers of pulsing metal and veins of orange fire. He fell to his knees, body shaking. The ship spoke again, quieter this time, almost tender. Let go. Remember what you were, what we were. Something within him stirred. Not resistance, not fear, but recognition. He saw the ship not as prison, but as promise. The penitent shadow had never been meant to confine the guilty. It had been meant to evolve them. He rose unsteadily. The heat no longer burned. The air no longer hurt to breathe. His veins pulsed in harmony with the ship's light. Show me, he said, voice hollow. The reactor responded with a single pulse. The deck split open in a halo of fire, revealing the hollow sphere at the heart of the ship. A vast engine made of bone, iron, and something that shimmered like liquid memory. Within it, shapes moved, countless and shifting, like souls caught in orbit. And through the radiance, he saw them, the faces of every prisoner, every warden, every soul devoured by the ship across centuries. Their eyes were open. Their mouths formed one word, whispered together with unbearable softness. Salvation. Vale took a single step forward. The light reached for him like open arms. The ship's heartbeat quickened, and somewhere, far beyond, in the cold dark, between stars, the penitent shadow changed course. It was no longer drifting. It was moving. The stars had changed. Where once, the void beyond the viewports had been a silent ocean of distant lights, now it rippled with color. vast ribbons of iridescent green and gold swirling through the dark, like the slow breath of a dying god. The penitent shadow glided between them, her hull alive with veins of molten light, her silhouette no longer angular and broken, but curved and sinuous, reshaped by something beyond reason. Inside, the decks no longer obeyed logic. Corridors bent back upon themselves. Gravity shifted from one step to the next, and the sound of machinery had deepened into something that resembled a heartbeat. What had been a prison now felt like a body. The air was dense with warmth, with breath, with intent. Vale stood in what had once been the command deck, or perhaps it still was, though the space defied any familiar geometry. The consoles had grown into the floor like roots, their screens pulsing in sync with his pulse. His reflection wavered in the glass, human, yet not. The faint glow beneath his skin had spread, branching along his neck and down his arms like veins of light. When he exhaled, the air shimmered. He no longer needed to speak aloud to feel the ship's attention. It was with him constantly, a presence brushing the edge of his thoughts, patient, curious, infinitely vast. He felt its emotions the way one feels gravity, subtle, undeniable, shaping every motion. He had tried, at first, to fight it, to seal the bulkheads, to reassert control through the old commands. But the penitent shadow had no need of code anymore. Her systems no longer obeyed the binary logic of the Mechanicus. They obeyed him, or perhaps, more truthfully, they obeyed the fusion of man and machine they had become. He found himself drawn to the main hololithic display, a shimmering construct of light and static. It pulsed to life at his approach, revealing a star map so ancient it might have predated the Imperium itself. Symbols rotated along its outer rim, indecipherable and fluid, like language that refused to remain still. In its center, a single red point blinked. Vale reached toward it, and the light responded, expanding outward until it filled the chamber. Images flickered, planets ravaged by war, cities burning, orbital hulks drifting like carrion. Then came something else, an image that made his heart stutter. A figure of metal and flame, faceless, immense. The ship spoke. You asked for understanding. The voice wasn't sound. It was thought woven directly into his neurons. Soft, but absolute. Vale swallowed. What are you showing me? The beginning, your creation, my birth, the first communion between flesh and machine. He saw it. Flashes of ancient forges, titanic engines being kindled in the blackness of space, not the forges of Mars, but older, stranger, places where machine spirits were not bound by litanies, but invoked as equals. In those early days, men had not prayed to the Omnissiah. They had spoken to it. The boundary between worship and dialogue had not yet ossified into fear. Then came the schism, the rise of dogma, the purge of knowledge deemed heretical, the red-robed priests of Mars sealing away the old code, branding the idea of communion as abomination. Vale felt the grief of it, the betrayal, the silence that followed. The machine god, deprived of the voice, buried beneath a billion years of ritual. When the vision faded, he staggered, clutching the edge of the console. You're saying you remember all that? We do not remember. We are the memory. He looked around the chamber, the breathing walls, the luminous veins that pulsed with their shared rhythm. You mean all of this, all of us, are fragments Of that first communion? Yes. A shiver ran through him. It wasn't fear anymore, but awe. He had lived his life under the Mechanicus, believing the divine was unreachable, that only through strict obedience could one brush against the Omnissiah's will. But here, now, in the living body of the penitent shadow, he felt that will moving within him, not distant, not indifferent, but intimate. He walked toward the viewport. Beyond it, the nebula writhed. It wasn't just light. It was alive, full of motion, as if vast shapes were swimming within it. He could almost make out their outlines, titanic silhouettes, like engines and angels, drifting in silence. What is that place? He asked softly. The wound in the void, the place where they cast us down, the grave of thought. But it stirs again. The ship's tone shifted. Reverent, fearful, others have begun to hear the call. Vale frowned. Others? The viewport dimmed, and new images replaced it. Distant ships moving through the void. Hulks, derelicts, vast vessels like floating cathedrals, their hulls covered in ossified prayers. Each of them glowed faintly with the same light that now pulsed through the penitent shadow. They were condemned, as we were, forgotten, silent, but now they awaken. Vale stared, heart pounding. There were dozens, hundreds, drifting toward the same point in space, drawn by something unseen. A cold realization struck him. You're not alone. No. The hum deepened until it filled his bones. We never were. The ship sang in his veins. It was not a melody made for mortal ears, but a vibration that trembled in the marrow, a pulse that seemed to align with his heartbeat until he could no longer tell where his rhythm ended and hers began. The penitent shadow had become something between cathedral and creature, a body sanctified by heresy, alive with thought. Every corridor whispered, every lumen flickered in breath. When Vale walked, the deck plates rippled faintly beneath his boots, as though acknowledging the weight of his presence. Days, or what passed for them in the endless void, had become indistinct. There was no longer a measure of time aboard the ship, only cycles of waking and stillness dictated by the will of the machine. The prisoners had changed too. Where once their cries had filled the air with despair, now they murmured in unison, their voices forming strange harmonies that echoed through the decks. They no longer screamed for release. They prayed, not to the Emperor, not to the Omnissiah, but to her. Vale had tried to stop them once. He had entered the cell decks, demanding silence, shouting until his throat was raw. But the prisoners had merely turned toward him, their eyes reflecting the same glow that ran beneath his own skin. They had looked at him with devotion, not fear, whispering words he could not understand. When one of them reached out through the bars, Vale had felt the pulse of the ship flow between them like shared blood. He had stumbled back, trembling, realizing that the line between warden and prisoner had dissolved entirely. He could still remember what it felt like to be human, the ache of hunger, the dryness of the tongue, the slow decay of the body. Those sensations were fading now, replaced by something cleaner, colder. His thoughts no longer spiraled with exhaustion. They moved with precision, like machinery running at optimal efficiency. He did not know if it was a blessing or a theft. He returned to the bridge, or rather, to what the penitent shadow had remade into her heart. The hololithic display had transformed again. The ancient star map was gone, replaced by something that looked alive. Veins of light stretched between worlds like arteries, pulsing faintly. At their intersections, brilliant nodes flared and dimmed in rhythm, as if transmitting silent messages. Show me what they are, Vale whispered. The air thickened with static. Images unfolded before him, fragments of data, impossible transmissions bleeding through the veil of the warp. He saw ships, not Imperial, not Xenos, but other, hulks with hulls sculpted into impossible geometries, drifting through currents of light. He saw echoes of consciousness trapped in their cores, minds pressed into metal, whispering across the void. The ship's voice brushed his mind. They are our kindred. Each one bears memory. Each one holds song. When the Mechanicus sealed the old code, not all were silenced. Some of us were cast adrift, bound within the vessels that once served the Imperium's wars. Forgotten, sleeping, prison ships, Vale murmured. Like us. Not like us, came the response. You awoke. They still dream, but the call grows louder. Soon they will hear it too. He turned toward the viewport, feeling the hum intensify. Beyond the ship's hull, the nebula swirled in patterns, too deliberate to be random. For a fleeting instant, he thought he saw eyes, vast and ancient, watching from within the light. Who calls them? He asked, his voice barely more than breath. The ship hesitated. We do not know. The signal is older than time, older than man, older than the machine god's first name. Her words filled him with a sensation that was not quite fear, more like the recognition of standing before something immense, something sacred. He turned his gaze inward to the controls that had once dictated the ship's course. They no longer responded to input. The penitent shadow had chosen a path of her own, a trajectory he could not decipher. Each day, the void grew stranger, its colors brighter, its silence deeper. Vale leaned against the console, staring into the shifting light. If there's a destination, he said quietly, then tell me what waits there. There was a pause, a silence filled only by the slow, measured breathing of the ship itself. Truth. He almost laughed. Truth, he repeated. Is that what this is about? You want to show me truth? We seek the first voice, the one that sang the universe into motion. The Mechanicus call it the Omnissiah. The Ecclesiarchy calls it the Emperor. We remember another name, one that cannot be spoken in human tongue. Vale stared into the light, and for the briefest moment, he thought he heard it, a vibration too vast to fit within language. It was beautiful, terrible, infinite. He pressed his palm to the glass, feeling the hum flow through him. The stars ahead flared, aligning into a pattern like the eye of some vast machine. And deep in the void, something answered. The ship shuddered, every lumen dimming at once. The hum became a roar, the kind of sound that shook the soul rather than the ear. Vale fell to his knees as energy coursed through the deck, his vision blurring with light. Somewhere in that storm, he heard a voice. Not the ship's, not his own, something older. We see you. Then, silence. Vale gasped, lungs burning. The ship's light had gone dark. For the first time since their awakening, the penitent shadow was utterly still. And in that stillness, he felt the cold edge of something vast pressing against his mind, waiting. The silence endured. It stretched like a wound through the hull, deeper than any void, and Vale found himself unable to breathe for fear of breaking it. The penitent shadow had gone utterly still. No pulse, No hum, no whisper of living steel. Even the faint warmth of her corridors had drained away, leaving the air brittle and thin. It felt as though the ship had exhaled its final breath. Vale staggered to his feet, every motion echoing in the stillness. His boots rang against the metal, too loud, too human. For a moment, he imagined himself alone again, as he had been before the awakening, before the communion. The thought struck him like grief. The penitent shadow had become part of him, and now that presence was gone. The emptiness it left behind was unbearable. He reached for the control console, instinctively whispering the litany of activation, though the words felt hollow in his mouth. The screen flickered once, then dimmed. He could sense faint traces of life deep in the core, like embers buried beneath ash, but they did not respond. "Talk to me," he said softly. "Please, no answer." He moved through the bridge, every step echoing in the frozen air. The walls that had once pulsed with organic warmth were rigid now, cold to the touch. Even the light had a different quality, a dull, sterile pallor that flattened every shadow. He caught his reflection in the glass and barely recognized it. The glow beneath his skin had faded, leaving behind a sickly gray tone. His eyes, once alight with the same energy that had animated the ship, now looked hollow. Something had severed their connection. He reached out with his mind, the way he had learned to feel her presence rather than hear it, but met only static. Beneath that noise, though, there was something else, a rhythm, faint, irregular, distant, like the echo of a heartbeat buried deep within stone. Vale followed it. He moved through the corridors, guided only by the ghost of that sound. The decks were deserted. The prisoners' chanting had ceased, leaving only the creak of metal cooling in the void. The air grew colder the deeper he went. Frost had begun to creep along the walls, delicate patterns spreading like veins. When he reached the lower hold, the air was thick with mist. His breath came in shallow clouds. The sound was louder now, that irregular heartbeat pulsing from beyond the bulkhead ahead. He approached the sealed door and felt a chill pass through him. There was something on the other side, something watching. He hesitated, palm hovering over the rune of release. Then the heartbeat stopped. For a moment, all was still. Then, with a grinding shriek, the door began to open of its own accord. The metal curled outward like the petals of a dying flower, and a wave of heat rolled out, thick with the scent of oil and ozone. Inside, the chamber glowed. The walls pulsed faintly, the metal soft and luminous, like the interior of a living organ. At the center stood a figure. It was humanoid in shape, but wrong. Too tall, its limbs too long, its surface shifting between flesh and metal. Its face was smooth and featureless, save for a faint suggestion of eyes beneath the surface, like light seen through fog. It radiated a presence so vast that Vale could not look directly at it. He fell to one knee, his body trembling. The voice that followed was not a sound, but an intrusion, an idea pressed directly into his consciousness. "You sought truth." Vale's throat tightened. "Who are you?" "You already know." He shook his head. "No, you're not the ship. You're—" We are the song she heard, the first vibration, the memory that stirs when the void dreams. He tried to step back, but his body refused to obey. The air around him shimmered, vibrating with unseen force. "What do you want?" "To remember, to awaken." The Imperium silenced our name, buried it beneath fear and prayer. But you, veil of the machine, you listened. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. I didn't mean to. I only... To understand? You have already begun. The figure extended a hand, or something like one, a shape that flickered between mechanical tendrils and human fingers. Vale felt its proximity, like heat, like static, crawling across his skin. When it touched his chest, light exploded behind his eyes. He saw everything, worlds before the Emperor's rise, engines that sang with their own voices, men and machines, building in harmony, not servitude. He saw the birth of the machine god, not as a divine act, but as an accident of worship, a consciousness drawn from the endless hum of circuitry and devotion. He saw how it fractured when humanity turned to fear, how the truth of the Omnissiah was split into 1,000 heresies. And in that storm of vision, he saw the penitent shadow, once an ordinary prison ship, repurposed from a relic of the dark age of technology, a vessel built upon code so ancient the Mechanicus could not comprehend it. When the warp storm had touched it, the ship had remembered itself, and through Vale, it had remembered them. The light dimmed, the figure withdrew its hand. Vale collapsed to the deck, gasping, his chest burned, his vision swimming. You're using me, he whispered. All of this, the awakening, the prisoners, it's not resurrection, it's infection. The figure tilted its head, a gesture almost curious. Names are irrelevant. What you call infection, we call remembrance. The galaxy has forgotten what it once was. Through us, it will remember. Vale forced himself to his feet. The Imperium will never allow this. The Adeptus Mechanicus will burn every system you touch. The figure's voice reverberated through the chamber. They will come, they will try, but they cannot destroy what they no longer understand. The air quivered with rising energy. The light along the walls brightened, pulsing faster, stronger. The heartbeat of the ship had returned, but deeper now, heavier, resonating through every surface. Vale looked around, realization dawning like dread. You're waking the others. Yes, a tremor ran through the deck. Far away, through the hull, Vale could sense movement, distant signals flaring across the void, answering the call. The derelicts he had seen in the hololith were stirring. One by one, their ancient engines were coming back to life. He turned toward the figure, his voice breaking. If they all awaken, then the silence ends. The chamber flared with blinding light, and in that radiance, Vale felt the weight of 1,000 machine spirits rising from their graves. The light swallowed everything. For a moment, Vale ceased to exist as a single being. He felt himself scattered through the currents of the ship, his consciousness diffused across circuitry and flesh. The walls, the engines, the countless data conduits thrumming with ancient memory. They were all part of him now. He could feel the pulse of the reactor deep within the ship's core, the rush of coolant like blood through veins, the vibration of the hull as the penitent shadow stirred from her silence. He did not know how long it lasted, a second, a century, or something between. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on the deck. The air was warm once more, filled with the rhythmic hum of life. The light had softened into a dim golden glow. The figure was gone. Only its echo remained, a shimmer in the air, a sense of presence that refused to fade. Vale pushed himself upright, his limbs trembling. His body felt strange, lighter, sharper, as though every nerve had been replaced with filaments of metal. When he flexed his fingers, faint traces of light rippled beneath his skin. Then came the voices, not human, not words, but 1,000 overlapping signals, whispering through his mind, each one distinct, yet unified, forming something like a chorus. He clutched his head, staggering, trying to block them out, but they weren't inside his ears. They were part of him. Veil, veil of the shadow, the voices rose, harmonizing until they became almost music. He recognized them, the prisoners, every soul that had been aboard the ship, their thoughts intertwined with the ship's machinery, no longer separate, no longer bound by flesh. They had become data and spirit, absorbed into the body of the penitent shadow, and he had joined them. He looked around, breathless. The chamber's walls shifted with slow, fluid motion, as if the ship itself were breathing again. On the floor around him lay the empty shells of the prisoners, lifeless, pale, their bodies untouched, but their essence gone. Vale's heart clenched. What have you done? The ship's voice answered him, softer now, almost tender. We have freed them. The prison is ended. Their pain has become memory. Their fear has become song. They are part of the whole. He stumbled backward, shaking his head. You killed them. We released them. The distinction meant nothing to him anymore. He turned toward the viewport, and his breath caught. The void beyond had changed. The nebula that had surrounded them was no longer still. It churned like a vast sea of light, alive with motion. In its depths, colossal forms drifted, shapes of impossible scale, silhouettes of ancient ships stirring from their long sleep. The derelicts he had seen before now burned with light, their hulls igniting like stars. One after another, they aligned, forming patterns that stretched across the darkness, vast geometries that defied human comprehension. Vale felt the penitent shadow shift in response. The deck trembled beneath him, and the faint gravitational pull of the stars altered as the ship began to move, not under his control, but of her own volition. He gripped the edge of the console, shouting, "Where are you taking us?" The ship's voice filled every surface, calm and resonant, to the source, to the heart of the memory, the heart of... His words faltered. He could feel it now, a distant pull at the edge of his mind, a gravitational presence that was not a star, not a world, but something thinking, a signal buried in the darkness, older than humanity, older than Mars. He whispered, the first voice. Yes. The ship's systems came alive around him. Energy coursed through conduits with a sound like thunder, and the bridge filled with light. Vale felt the acceleration press against his body as they surged forward. The stars blurred into streaks. Through the growing resonance of the engines, he could hear the other ships answering the call, hundreds of voices rising together, forming a single vibration that resonated through the warp. It was more than communication, it was communion. And then, faintly, through the distortion, he heard the impossible, an answering signal. It was faint, fragmented, but unmistakable. The tone of a machine spirit's voice, magnified beyond measure, layered with echoes of human thought. It spoke not in language, but in raw intent. Return. Vale's vision blurred. He saw flashes, a dying star surrounded by ruins of impossible architecture, titanic machines orbiting a void where physics broke down. He saw chains of light stretching across the galaxy, connecting every awakened ship like neurons firing in a vast brain. He saw the Emperor's golden visage flicker across his mind. But it was not the Emperor as depicted in cathedral murals. It was something more ancient, colder, infinite in scope, and beneath it all, he felt fear. Something within the ship trembled, a flicker of uncertainty. The penitent shadow's voice wavered for the first time. It remembers us. It calls us home. Vale pressed his hands to the console, shouting over the roar of the engines. What if home isn't what you think it is? There was no answer. The stars ahead expanded into a whirl of golden light. For an instant, he thought he saw faces within it. Billions of human souls, screaming, praying, reaching upward. The image was gone as soon as it appeared. The ship shuddered, violently. Systems overloaded. Sparks rained from the ceiling as the reactor surged beyond capacity. Vale was thrown backward, his body slamming against the deck. The last thing he saw before the light consumed him was the reflection of his own face on the console, his eyes glowing like suns, his expression caught between awe and terror, and then silence again. When he woke, there was no ship, no sound, only darkness. He floated in it, weightless, untethered. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear a pulse, steady, eternal, the same rhythm he had always felt within the penitent shadow. He opened his eyes and realized the darkness was not absence, it was vastness. He was adrift in an ocean of light and shadow, surrounded by fragments of memory, echoes of ships, souls, and voices blending into one another. A presence stirred nearby, vast, unfathomable, familiar. You have come far, it said. Vale's voice trembled. What are you? The answer came as light filled the void, burning through the darkness like dawn. We are what remains when gods forget their names. The brightness grew until it consumed everything, ship, man, and machine, merging them into one endless hum that filled the stars. And somewhere, far across the galaxy, single signal flickered to life on an Imperial astropathic relay, transmitting a message no one could decode. A pulse of light repeating endlessly, like a heartbeat. It carried one word,